Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Money Bear podcast. Guys, it's been 1 year since we have launched the Money Bear podcast. We're having our June reunion. Actually, to be fair, I'm recording this on June 26th, and our actual official 1 year reunion, I believe, was on July 4th. So we just have a July 4th anniversary. Pretty badass. What can I say? I'm literally pulling it up right now. Yeah. So our very first episode came out July 4th, and this episode is going to come out. Let me look. Is it July 4th? No, July 3rd. So happy 1 year anniversary, my friends. I can't believe that it's been a year. Honestly, it feels like something that I have equally been doing forever and not doing very long at all. I don't know how that works, but that's how it is in my brain right now. So I just want to say thank you guys. It's pretty cool that, we've had almost 50,000 downloads in our first year. Is that true? Yeah. So almost 50,000. We're just under that mark, which I have no idea what's good and what's not good. I know some people are out there getting millions of downloads, but I really appreciate the 50,000 of you or the 50,000 downloads by my audience. So I appreciate you all. To celebrate our 1 year anniversary, we've been doing a giveaway for reviews. So if you left us a review in the last couple of weeks, we are doing giveaways there. So we'll start off today's episode doing a giveaway. And then what I'm going to do for kind of a heck yes, whatever my words, a anniversary celebration is I looked back at the statistics and was like, okay, what is our best performing episode? And oddly enough, our best performing episode is the very first episode, which is when I shared my story. So what I want to do is do a couple of episodes diving a little deeper into my story. And then while I do that, I'll also each week that I do the deep dive into Clo Bare's story, aka deep dive into talking about myself, I will also be doing a couple of listener questions. So we'll start off with a listener question so that you guys are still getting, the finance education that you want while also hearing my story. My story obviously is also going to have a lot of finance education in it because I can ramble. So that's kind of the plan. We're just going to break it down. I'm going to dive deep, and yeah, I'm excited to see what you guys think. So thanks again. I do feel like a little giddy that you guys are all here, and I appreciate you. So here we go. So before I do the listener question, let's do the giveaway. So we got from Ashley A. Villa, 5-star review. Thank you so much. My preferred podcast for Finance Fridays. I just started following Chloe within the last month, and I really appreciate how honest and real she is. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you. Ashley, just send us an email at chloe@clobare.com to thank you. We want to send you the Lazy Investors course for free. That's a over $900 value. So I hope you enjoy it. All right. So before we dive into my story and the purpose of this episode this week, let's answer one question. So this was from, let's see here. This is kind of funny. I tell my wife my record collection is an investment. Thoughts? Is it? Here's the thing. Okay. So this is from Generic Metal Dude. I feel like there was a little bit of cheekiness in that question because, is it just something that you're doing as a hobby that you enjoy for fun? And what I will say is, number one, if it is just something you love doing, there's nothing wrong with that. We don't want to take the joy out of spending money. We don't want to take the joy out of your life or your day. But is it really a investment? Because do you know the total value of it? Are you keeping track of the total value of it? Are you treating it like an investment? Are you aware of the resale value? Do you know which records you would sell if you needed to liquidate? Those would be my questions for you. Is it an investment? It could potentially be an investment if you're taking care of it like an investment. If you are keeping track of the values in that way, and not even like on a yearly basis, maybe you do like a little look-see to see what is the value, what are my assets here? Are you including it in your net worth? If the answer to all of that is no, then you're probably not actually treating it like an investment. You're really just using that to justify buying more records, which is fine. You don't need to justify buying what you love as long as you and your wife are on the same page and understand that you both get to spend money on what you love and you're also working towards your money goals. So I hope that helps, but I feel like it was like a tongue-in-cheek question, but to be fair, One, it's totally okay if your record collection is not an investment and it's just something you love doing. Both you and your wife should feel empowered to spend money on things that you do bring you joy. So that's number one. Number two, if it is an investment, treat it like an investment. Understand it. Know what you would do, where you would resell, how would you get the most bang for your buck. So hope that helps. Because I think that your wife, I mean, I don't know anything about you two as a couple, but if your wife is like, not happy with you spending money on records, but you came to her with a spreadsheet of all the value and the resale values of each item, I think that would be a different conversation, right? Of like, no, this is an investment and here are the numbers. But if you're like kind of like tongue in cheek being like, yeah, it's an investment to justify your purchases, then that can make her feel a little unheard if she's concerned about finances. So yeah, it all just kind of depends. That was an interesting one to do for like a first listener question before I start off my story. Okay, guys, I don't know if I'm even prepared to tell my story, even though I've lived it. But I kind of feel like this one is going to be like childhood and like the impacts my childhood had on me and my spending habits. So let's take it back to the beginning. I grew up as the oldest sister of a family of 5 siblings. So I had my older brother who is only like around 18 months older than I am. I have my younger brother Max, and I think he just turned 30. I have my younger sister Sydney, and she is 28. And I have and to give you guys perspective, I'm 32 right now. And then I have my baby brother who is, I believe, 26, 27. So my mom had us all within 7 years. So I always just have to be like, okay, 7 years, that means like if Corey, my older brother, is 34, I think he's 34 because I'm 32. He's either 33 or 34 and 7 years. So let's see, that takes us back to, 28. So Ethan's either 20. Yeah, he's probably 27. Anyway, that doesn't matter. You guys don't care. But anyway, we're all really close. But because my parents had 5 kids and they were like, they were young, they were in their 20s when they were having these kids and popping them out. In fact, I remember when I was 22 or 23 asking my dad, like, what do I do with my life? What were you doing with your life at 22 or 23? And he's like, I was preparing for more children. I'm like, wow, cannot relate, says the 32-year-old who still doesn't have kids and probably never will. But anyway, taking it back to the beginning, I was one of 5. I was the oldest sibling or oldest daughter. And the reason I say that, because I think it does matter, I was often tasked with a lot of the emotional labor work as a child. For example, watching over my siblings while my mom was catching up on sleep because she was working nights, and just kind of being like the bossy, in charge older sister from the time that I was like 9 years old, if not earlier than that, just because I was a little responsible lady. I loved being my mom's helper. I loved helping out and just like feeling like I had that kind of purpose, which, to be fair, I think also ended up being a little bit problematic over the long term just because of the like parentification of children, right? I don't feel like I had a full childhood sometimes just because, from the very, very early age, I was helping not only on an emotional labor standpoint, but also on a like, let me help with the children standpoint. And that's not, my parents did a good job. I am the person I am today. We all still have a good relationship. So like by all intents and purposes, my parents did a very good job of raising a bunch of really fantastic children. But I think the emotional labor that I did from an early age caused me to also start working from a very early age. So I knew in depth my parents' issues and stresses because they didn't really try to hide it from us. Granted, none of the other kids really paid attention like I paid attention, but from the earliest I can remember, we were in the house that my parents are still in, which I would have been 7 or 8, between 7 and 9, I would say. I remember stress about money, like from the very beginning, just because it's like that was always around. My parents had 5 kids in the Midwest. My mom was a nurse. My dad worked at Caterpillar, which is like the biggest employer in my hometown. And money was just always tight. And it's not like, since they had gotten married so young they were 20. They got married at 20. They couldn't even legally drink at their wedding. they were like living off of mac and cheese, they were in over their head for sure. So I sympathize with that. But I think that made me fiercely, number one, not want kids. Number two, aware that money was like a root of stress. Money was an issue. And I started getting an allowance around the age of like 7 or 8, if I'm correct. I want to say it was like in third grade probably. And I remember we would be allowed to like follow my mom to the store or follow my dad to the store. And like, if we wanted to, we could spend that money. But if we wanted, we also had the option of saving the money. And my parents would kind of be like, yeah, if you save your money, you can buy something really cool someday. And I was just like, yes, fuck it. I'm going to buy this like weird makeup thing that's made out of wax and smells kind of funny, and I'm gonna like forget it even exists within 24 hours. And I would always do that with my like the money that came in, or I'd buy candy or something like that. And because of that, I started to believe that boys were good with money and women weren't, and like girls just weren't good with money. It was just like that's a boy thing. All my brothers are really good at saving up their dollars so that they can buy like cool robot things and actual toys. And I was like, oh, I'm just not capable of that. I need to spend this immediately. I want something new and shiny all of the time. And so, and actually, I think I lived at the house in Menard. So we might have started getting an allowance even earlier than that, when we were, gosh, it would have been before we moved to Colorado. So I might have been like 5. We might have started getting $1 around 5. I can't remember. But anyway, we were pretty young when we started getting like our little allowance, and we got allowance, I think, through high school. And it just kind of like, it went up as the older we got. But anyway, so from the very, very early age, at the very least before the age of 10, I had already cemented this idea in my brain that boys were good with money and girls were bad with money. And that's just like the way that it was, especially because when we consider who was stressed about money in my home, or who was vocally stressed about money in my home, it was always my mom. It was always my mom talking to my dad about money, always my mom concerned with money. And my dad, he's just not a person who ever gets stressed out. So it was another internalizing thing of like, yeah, women are just bad with money. And so we stress about it, not knowing or recognizing that, no, my mom was just doing the emotional labor of being the one who was worried about it. Didn't mean she was the bad one or the one who was bad with money. We're obviously not identifying people as good or bad based off of their money behaviors. That was just a word slip. It was just that she was the one who was concerned about it. And she was the one who was responsible for trying to get something done, because it wasn't like my dad wasn't taking that kind of initiative. So I do want to recognize that, because emotional labor is definitely important. But anyway, from the early age of 9, I started working in any way that I could. So I would go and work at concession stands, where me and my friend Alicia at the time, we could like eat all the candy, and like we could eat the hot dogs, and like they were like, you can eat $5 worth of snacks, which at the time was a lot. And I'm pretty sure we always ate more than $5 worth of snacks. But, I'd work at that concession stand making probably like $5 an hour or something like that during soccer games where our parents were at, or they'd drop us off and they'd come pick us up later because they were right down the road. And that was tons of fun, taught me some responsibility. I started babysitting I think I was 11 when I started babysitting. I remember my summers were like dedicated towards babysitting from there on out. If I wasn't going to like basketball camps and things like that, I worked as a referee. I worked as so many like side things before I ever had like my first like taxable income, like my first like job that I would get an actual tax form from. Cause like all of those things were like under the table, right? You'd go to babysitting, you'd get some cash. You'd go to the concession stands, the refereeing, all of that was just like cash for kids instead of cars for kids. And it's so funny because I think back to that, and it's like, had I just reported that on taxes, I wouldn't have been taxed anyway. And I could have like started investing from the age of like 9 years old, guys. Now, of course, it doesn't matter. And of course, it's like, you were a kid. My parents didn't know that you could do that. Like none of us, like we can't dwell on that. But it is wild to think of that. I could have now at 32 years old, I could have been investing for 20 plus years by now instead of, less than 10. I've not been investing for very long at all at this point in my life. But I don't know what happened to all that money. I think that like, obviously it wasn't a lot of money, but I think I would just spend it on the most random things like nail polish and snacks and food and ice cream. And I like how like three of the last four things that I said were all food, but it just burned a hole through my pocket. And to be fair, like we also had to buy birthday gifts whenever we would go to like a birthday party. We'd have to buy stuff at school. We'd have book fairs at school, like all those things. So I don't know where any of that money went, but I was a kid. Like, of course, I don't know where any of that money went. So working from a really young age, I think did instill quite the work ethic in me. Obviously, I'm a pretty big workaholic and I'm much more balanced these days. But for me, the answer to everything was never work smarter. It was always just like work harder, take on more work. And there were times even in college where I would have like 3 jobs, even though I wasn't saving anything. I wasn't using that money wisely. It was just like I needed more money. And that, I guess, really started from a really early age, because in my mind, it was always like, I just need to make more money. I just need to make more money. So as a kid, I obviously did not have any kind of like management system for that money, but I do remember the most lucrative, like pre-high school job that I took on was babysitting all day, like all summer day from, I was probably like 13 or 12 to 13. And I would spend all day on a summer day throughout the summer babysitting. You'd get paid like $30 to $50 a day, which sounded like so much money back then. And I don't remember what I did with it. I don't think I did anything with it, honestly. I think I just spent it on stupid stuff, which is wild because I remember at the time being like, wow, some people are saving up enough money to buy a car, like a car that they can buy when they're 16, like a $3,000, $4,000, $6,000 car. And I just remember thinking like, how do they do that? But now as an adult looking back, I'm like, I could have done that. But I was so concerned with spending it on like little stuff and doing things with my friends. Now, granted, like, that's okay. Like you're a kid, you don't have to be totally responsible all the time, but it would have been nice to have like some kind of a balance or some kind of a, like, this part you get to have fun with, and then this part you get to save for your future. And if I was a parent ever, or if my siblings were like, Chloe, we're going to make you in charge of teaching our children how to money, I would maybe like do kind of buckets with the kids of just being like, all right, so 10% of this, we're going to save. 20% of this goes to taxes. And I would save that money for them. And I'd be like, I would give it back to them eventually, but I'd be like, well, sorry, you got to pay taxes on it. And then surprise them later on and just be like, look at how much extra money we saved. We were actually saving 30% of your income, but like getting them used to taxes early. You know what I mean? And then the rest you can spend on whatever you want. Like you can do exactly what you want. But anyway, got my first like big girl job, and or not big girl, like high school job when I was 16. I started working at a coffee shop in my hometown. It was this teeny tiny coffee shop. And I was so excited because I was like, I thought the dream job was to work at a coffee shop. And a bunch of my friends worked there. And the boss of the coffee shop, the owner of the coffee shop, she was very much extremely manipulative, probably like a manic, maybe borderline personalities. Like she was so awful. I have never had a more toxic person that I've worked for than this person. And she would set employees against each other. She would write you up over anything, like the dumbest things. Like she didn't like the way you supposedly talked to somebody else, but she was the one who was like lighting that fire. And she wrote me up. I remember I was like 15 or 16 at the time. I think I had to have been 16 because I had to drive to it. There was a new worker there who was not doing her job. She was really frustrating to work with. She just constantly like would make mistakes and not listen and not do what she was supposed to do. And I remember just being frustrated with her and like saying like, something along the lines of like, you're not doing this correctly. Like, I don't want to be responsible for all of this. And she told the owner, who she was related to, that I was being a jerk, that I had too much attitude, that I was not treating her fairly. And she wrote me up. So the owner wrote me up. And I remember telling my parents and just being like, I just got wrote up for the biggest piece of bullshit ever. Like, obviously I didn't cuss back then, but I was like, and I'm really frustrated because like, this is not true. This is just not true. It's also not fair. And like, if you're not doing your job, you should own it. Like you should be held accountable. And my parents were like, fight it. Tell her that you don't agree with this and you're not signing it. And it was it was funny because when I brought it back to her and I said, hey, I'm not signing this. I'm not signing this write up because I don't agree with it. And I didn't treat her unfairly. I treated her just like I would treat anybody else. And she was like, just sign it. Like everybody just signs. These don't really mean anything. Just sign it. And I was like, well, if it doesn't mean anything, then why should I sign it? And so I just straight up would not sign it. And the owner was like, I just want you to know that out of all the write-ups I've done of everybody who's ever worked here, no one has ever fought against one. No one has ever said, I'm not signing this. No one has ever said, like, this is not fair. And she's like, and I'm kind of impressed. And I was like, thanks, I guess. Like, what? It's so toxic. It's such a messed up like worldview, especially too, like she was hiring a bunch of young women, bunch of like high school women. And it's like, what are you teaching these women? You're teaching them that like going to business or working for yourself just means working with like toxic human beings who are going to stab you in the back. And like, this is an adult who is doing this. Oh my God, it was crazy. So I worked there for a little while and it was really fun because that like coffee shop was like a coffee shop hybrid event space. So like we'd get to be there while people were setting up for like shows and bands and things like that. But yeah, that was quite the recovered memory of like being like, I'm not going to sign this write up. I did not do anything wrong. So after probably working like 6 months at that job, I then got my dream job at 16 years old working at Barnes and Noble. It was over the holidays. And I guess I must have worked at the coffee shop a little bit longer than 6 months because I remember being there for a summer. And I walked in during the holidays to Barnes and Noble and they were hiring for their holiday help. And I was like, I'm going to apply. And I applied and I had an interview on the spot and I got the job. And they didn't know I was 16 at the time. I don't know how, because I'm pretty sure I had to put like my age on the application. Maybe not, because I don't know if there's like laws against that or if there were laws against that back then. But they assumed I was over the age of 18 and I wasn't. I was 16. And at the time, the only people who were allowed to work who were hired that were 16, they were only allowed to work in the cafe. But they thought I was older. And so I got to work in the music department, which was my favorite. I was such like a hipster emo chick that I loved being around all the albums and the DVDs and, learning the new music and adding to my like CD collection. For those of you who have CD-ROMs or had CD-ROMs, I was all about that life. And I loved finding like new music because the cool thing about Barnes and Noble at the time is that when you had a CD, you could scan it and then you could listen to it. And it was like such a cool thing to be able to be back there and managing this whole department all by myself and learning like the ways with all these people who were way older than me. And they all just assumed I was like between 18 and 20 years old. So that was like my next job. And I worked at Barnes and Noble for years on and off. So that was such a wonderful experience for me, even though there were like some toxic things there and like people who were shitty there too, of course. I just learned how to be an employee and how to work with other people and how to work with adults. And what was so wonderful about it, and I still go back to that Barnes and Noble to this day to just say hi to Deb, who was like my favorite manager at the time. Deb would always put me on the schedule. So it was like, if I was home from college and I needed to make some money for a week, she'd put me on the schedule. If I was home for the summer, she'd put me on the schedule. If I was home for a week, she'd put me on the schedule. So it was really wonderful because I was able to build these relationships with people who it was like, even as I was going through the shittiest shit in my journey over the years, I always knew that I could go back to Barnes and Noble if I needed to. Obviously, Barnes and Noble did not pay enough. It was not something that like would have sustained my life or would have allowed me to flourish and grow in the way that I have. But it was so comforting knowing that at the very least, I could go back to a retail job that doesn't suck, like a retail job that I actually loved, that I loved being around these people. And that's like still a comfort to know that like, hey, I always got Barnes and Noble if they don't shut down. Luckily, my Barnes and Noble, the one that I, originally worked at, is still there and hopefully it stays there. But Deb, shout out to you. I have so much love for you and I appreciate the ways that you were there for me that you probably didn't even realize. So that happened from 16 to 22. I worked there on and off and I loved it. I'm really grateful that got to be my first retail experience. And again, guess what I did with the money, guys? No fucking idea. I'm pretty sure it just went right out the window. I don't think it was ever in a savings account. I remember in high school and college being unable to ever have $1,000 in my bank account, like feeling like that was impossible. But if I could get past that, maybe I could like start something. Maybe I could that seemed like such a lot of money, but I couldn't do it. I will say in high school, I did get very good at hoarding money for specific things. So for example, my biggest dream in high school was to teach English in Spain, or to, at the very least, I guess in high school, it was to go to Spain. I thought Europe was this like mystical place and only rich people got to go. And I mean, to be fair, at the time, tickets were really expensive back then. It was like a ticket to Spain, even back in the early 2000s, was like $1,000. It was expensive as hell. And I had never even saved $1,000 before. And I wanted so badly to go on the junior senior trip to Spain. So I started saving as much as I could. So that was when I think it was sophomore to junior year, I started like aggressively saving for that. But it was hard. I ended up saving about $3,000 in the span of like 2 years to be able to go to Spain. And then I also had founded like a new fundraiser for my like Spanish class, because every time that the teacher would take this trip to Spain, she would do a bunch of fundraisers to help pay for the trip. And when I was a senior in high school. So I think I started saving probably my junior year, and then we went at the end of my senior year. But when we were coming up with like fundraising ideas, we were already doing like the chocolate bars where you walk around and you like sell a chocolate bar for $1, and that like goes towards the expenses. But I came up with the idea that we should do a Spanish camp. And I was like, parents would love for their kids to learn Spanish. We all have enough language to at least be able to teach kids the basics. What if we had like a camp, a 5-day camp where kids come for 2 hours, 1 to 2 hours, and we divide them based off of their age and we teach them Spanish, and we freaking did it. And it's so cool now, like as an adult, I'm like, I can't believe I did that as like a senior in high school. I like organized a whole freaking camp. It was me and my friend Kylie. We were like, let's do this. And Kylie was like the dreamer. She was like, let me think of all these cool things that we could do. And I'm like, here's how we do it. And that's always been my role in life. I'm an executor. I'm like somebody who's like, oh yeah, you have the dream. Here's how we're going to do it. And I love that about myself. That's one of my favorite things about myself. Now I have a little bit of the dream as well. But she and we worked together to organize this whole thing, to get it out, the information out to the parents, to come up with the curriculum, to organize each of the classes, divide the classes, t-shirts. And then the day came when we were allowed to like teach our students, like as like seniors and juniors in high school, we were teaching our students Spanish. And like, we focused on like how to do the ABCs, the basics, and like, putting them in like conversational groups. And from that moment, I knew right away I would be a fantastic teacher. And I am a really good teacher. Like, I will give myself a pat on the back because I'm a phenomenal teacher, and I will give more data to support that further on. But I never wanted to teach. I never wanted to be a teacher because I knew teachers didn't get paid any money. And I already had money trauma telling me you have to make more money. You have to make as much money as possible. And even though my interests lied in things that weren't traditionally going to make people a lot of money, like I loved writing, I loved reading, I loved creating and art and stuff like that. I loved music. I was like a musician. I was in the musicals. I was classically trained in opera. Like I was a pianist for 10 years. I loved all those things, but I knew each and every one of those things was never going to make me any money. So that's when we kind of transitioned into college years, and college is a bit of a disaster. So we're going to leave that for the next episode, because the college years are a bit of a disaster. And I'll explain why, both from a money perspective as well as a mental health perspective. But like I said, kind of to wrap up the high school years and the childhood years, the biggest things that I took away from my childhood years was, one, money is stressful and it can control your life completely in a negative way. Like where you can't do things, you can't live a full life, you're not as good as everybody else. You're, all these other people have more resources and more availability, and like you're just less than. And so I felt less than a lot of the time. And I don't think that was fully because of money, but I think that was a part of it, where I just never felt good enough. I never felt classy enough. I never felt like resourced enough. And I had so many more resources than a lot of people. But as a kid, you don't recognize that. You don't have the bigger picture. You're just like, I just know I'm not this person. Like I'm not able to do the things that I want. I can't go on this field trip. I can't do this thing because of money. And so that kind of rooted itself in me of, money is this big, scary thing that you have no business like figuring out. The only thing you can do is make as much money as possible. But your interests are not, like your skills are not valuable skills. You are going to have to be a teacher. You are going to have to be a writer. You are going to have to struggle. So it's like from the earliest stages, I had already had these beliefs in my system, whether conscious or unconsciously. And it was just like, I never even tried to learn how to money. I never even tried to figure out a system that would allow me to save for anything, because I just believed you were either born with this skill set or not. And so I bought into this idea that I did not have that skill set. I was not prepared. I was not able to do that. So that was kind of childhood. And then high school, it was just this doubling down of, I don't know how to manage this, but at least I can make it. At least I can make this money and I can be scrappy with it. And if I have to, I can save it for specific things. So I wanted Spain so bad. I wanted to go to Spain so bad that I was able to hoard that money because it was so important to me. But I blew that $3,000 for the 2 weeks I was in Spain. A little more than 2 weeks is 18 days. I blew through that so fast on crap, random crap, not even doing fun and exciting things. I just blew through that money. But that's kind of what happens when we only have those two mentalities. Oh my God, I'm going to hoard like crazy. And then you still have no skills when the time comes to spend. And so it was a frenzied spending that didn't feel very satisfying, because it was I wasn't actually getting what I wanted out of it. But we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into those college years. And because I think that's something that a lot of people experience, the hoarding mentality versus the anxiety mentality, the spend mentality. It can be so frustrating because you're just how can I save up $3,000, but then spend it like I've lost my mind? How does that happen? How are these my only two modes? And that's something I dealt with for almost 30 years. So we'll be talking about that more in depth the next episode. But yeah, I started working. I started developing my work ethic. I started developing some confidence. I think work has always helped me become a little bit more confident. And that's not a linear progress. Sometimes things go back and looped and up and down. But I do think working and making my own money made me a more confident and more independent person from the time that I was really young. But that's that's a swinging scale or a wild pendulum of confidence, because my confidence has changed a lot over the years. I think now at 32, I'm the most confident I've ever been. The areas I still struggle with is believing in love. Not to get too deep on you guys, and you'll kind of understand why after you hear the rest of my story. But since I mentioned love throughout this time in high school, I was the type of person who almost always had a boyfriend, which is so funny because I've spent the last 10 years of my life pretty much always single. But from 14, I had my first boyfriend his name was Sam. He was an artist. He was so sweet, but also smothering. He just loved me so much and didn't know how to handle that. And no one does at 14. I think he was 16. And I felt so squished. I felt so suffocated by that, especially because I had seen my parents' relationship, and not to get too deep into it, but my parents' relationship made me never want to get married ever. They're just roommates with children, and they're working on it. And, they're both going to therapy now, but that was what I saw as a kid, was love and marriage and children. It just leads you to be trapped. And I don't want that. I don't want to be trapped. So him, the way that he loved me felt like a wet blanket getting thrown over me. And I was in that relationship for 2 years in high school, which is a long time. I mean, it was at least a year. And then I think the second year we dated on and off. But it was almost 3 years because he was always coming back around. You know how those messy first loves are. And I did love him. I'm sure he's a wonderful adult now who has gone to therapy and knows how to not squish somebody with his love. But that's the best way I could describe it. I felt squished, but I also felt very loved. And then in high school, had a couple of casual relationships where you're just dating around, spending a couple months talking or whatever. And then my junior year, I dated somebody who I had known for a really long time. I mean, I guess in high school years, I had known him in high school. He had graduated. I think I was 16 or 17. I think I was 16, and he was in college and had just gotten into college. So he was 18 or 19. And he traumatized me in a way that was associated with religious trauma for sure, because I should just do an episode on my dating history because it's so messy. But I will say he was incredibly narcissistic but in a way that was through or disguised as his love for God and his love for Jesus. And he was a total like covert asshole and incredibly toxic, but everyone loved him because he was like this super Christian who was outgoing and nice to everybody. And like, you know, he would go out of his way to do like super nice things. Like he's the guy who purposely would take, you know, somebody from a special education class to prom because like, which is a wonderful thing, but it was like it was performative. It's not like he had a friendship with this person. It wasn't like, you know, he wanted to do it to like look good. And he did. He looked good. Everybody like thought he was like the best person ever. And then I got to experience dating him. And oh man, I just wish I could go back to Chloe and just be like, this is wrong. You don't deserve this. But he was toxically Christian in the way that he could justify some of his bad behaviors through Christianity. He also, I don't even know how to describe this person without getting too like graphic. Let me say here, this is what I will say. I was 16 and you know, you're messing around at 16. You're already starting to mess around and stuff. He was saving his first kiss for marriage. And because again, the level of Christian he was, he, however, proceeded to do many other things. And then after he would do those many other things, he would make us pray every single time for forgiveness. Yep. And I knew it was messed up. Like at the time, I didn't have a way of communicating that or understanding. I was like, I'm pretty sure this is messed up. But eventually he did kiss me. And I remember when I broke up with him, his like parting words were, you spoiled my lips. So that probably gives you some insight into this person, right? And it's not like I was an angel. I wasn't a fully formed human at the time, but I will never forget that. And like, if I ran into him as an adult, like I know he's married now and I can't help but like the high schooler in me is like, I spoiled his first kiss. Like I took that first kiss from his wife, but I didn't take it. He did it. That was a him. He kissed me. That could be a whole podcast series in of itself. So I won't get too into it, but what I will say is like, the dating record that I had in high school impacted me and financially as well in ways just in terms of how I viewed myself and how I viewed my role within the world. I think that in some of the both in that relationship with the guy who I spoiled his lips and Sam, I felt less in control. I felt like I was always at the whims of other people. And even with like Sam, I remember just thinking like, oh my God, I have to marry this person because he loves me so much. And I just felt like I have no other choice. I can't hurt his feelings. And the same with the, religious person who was essentially manipulating me. I just felt like I didn't have a voice and that everything that he said would go and that everything was his, his destiny, his agenda, essentially. And then after that, I dated the person who I would then date on and off for 10 years, who still owes me $60,000 to this day. So it was kind of just this pattern of seeking security and direction outside of myself from the earliest age and not feeling in control. And that continues. And we will see more of that in next week's episode. And I'll try to I didn't even think about including like my dating in with this too, because that, like I said, could make this into a very long series. But I want to make sure that it all relates to money. But here's the thing, like almost everything we do relates to money. So we will talk about my ex and the college years in next week's episode. So hopefully this wasn't too hard to follow. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, but this is going to be an interesting learning process for me. So if you have questions about my story, if you're like, hey, you started to talk about this one thing, but I was curious about like, you just then started talking about something else. Can you speak more on this? Let me know. DM me at either the Chloe Daniels or the Money Bear, and I will try to get those questions answered and we'll start that off next week. So, all right, friends, that's part 1 of Chloe's story. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too rambly, and be sure to leave us a review, because remember, you could win some free stuff for leaving us a review and getting picked. But I will see you guys on Thursday. Bye-bye. Love you. Thank you so much for listening to the Money Bear podcast. If you've made it this far, do us a favor, take 2 seconds, rate, review, and subscribe. It seriously means the world to me. And if you just take a second to do that, I will appreciate you endlessly. And if you do, let me know on Instagram and I'll thank you personally. So, got that. And of course, since we were talking about anything financial on this show, please note that nothing on this show is intended as financial advice. I don't know you, unfortunately, and because of that, I cannot tell you what to do with your money. You got to work with a financial professional who knows your situation, who is preferably a fiduciary, and keep in mind that everything that we talk about on this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It's all my opinion. So, there's that. If you want to see our full terms and conditions, head on over to the show notes. And while you're there, we've got free resources for you to get started on your money journey down in the show notes as well, including a free guide to help you with your budgeting templates and budgeting tutorials and investing 101, understanding the different accounts that are out there. All that good stuff is inside of my free guide, which is also available at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/guide. And if you're ready to take our relationship to the next level, I am also hosting a monthly investing class. And that investing class, you can find the times we're offering it this month at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/webinar. That link is in the show notes as well. And that's where you have the chance to meet me live and ask those money questions live. It's a good time. We've had over 20,000 people as of recording this join or register. And yeah, it's always nice to meet you guys. So I hope to see you there. Again, all that is available down in the show notes. So thank you again for coming and listening. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next week.